Throughout history, the Middle East has been a troubled region. And today, increasing conflicts and violence continue to flood the news as this area becomes more and more the focus of world attention. Will the Middle East be, as some have said, the flashpoint of World War III? How can we know where events in the Middle East are headed? This week on The World Tomorrow, Richard Ames.
The Middle East, the most volatile of the world's trouble spots. It's not simply a war of politics, bombs, guns, and tear gas. It is a conflict of wills and deep-rooted beliefs where the weapons are passions and the strongholds are thousands of years of tradition. On today's World Tomorrow program, The Middle East in Prophecy, I'm going to complete this two-part series concerning this critical area of the world. Today, much of the controversy centers around the state of Israel, which was created by the United Nations only 40 short years ago. Israel is one small state among the 22 nations of the Middle East, surrounded by 100 million Arabs. With some of these nations, Israel maintains a precarious peace. Other nations deny Israel's right to exist as an independent nation and will not rest until the Jewish state is destroyed. Within Israel's borders and the territories it has occupied since 1967 are about 2 million Palestinian Arabs. Many are frustrated, bitter, impatient with a situation that offers no hope and no future. As witnessed by the violence in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank in recent months, the tensions in the region only seem to escalate. For 40 years, the Middle East has experienced turmoil. Today, peace seems as far away as ever. Fuses have grown shorter, the conflicts deeper, and new forces have arisen in this tension-filled zone. As we'll show you, it's no longer just a regional conflict. What happens next in this area will increasingly affect the entire world. It's a very precarious situation. Is there any viable solution? Is there any hope for peace? Can we know where these critical Middle East events are heading? Well, the answer to these questions is yes. There is a solution, and we can absolutely know what lies ahead. The future of the Middle East is predictable, because today's news was predicted years ago by the prophets God sent to ancient Israel, and it's recorded for us today in the pages of the Bible. Should that surprise us? Both Arabs and Jews know that their historical origins can be found in this book. They know they are descended from the two sons of Abraham, the Arabs from Ishmael and the Jews from Isaac. They were rivals from the beginning. The Bible shows how Abraham sent Ishmael and his mother away to maintain peace in his family. But there has rarely been peace in this family. Today, nearly 4,000 years later, the descendants of Ishmael and Isaac still confront each other. The Bible shows that in the last days, their homeland would be a center of turmoil, and that events in the Middle East would have a great global impact. Luke 21:20 says, "But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then know its desolation is near." Zechariah 14, verses 2 and 3. "For I will gather all the nations to battle. The Lord will go forth and fight against those nations as he fights in the day of battle." Revelation 16, verses 14 and 16. "Kings of the earth and of the whole world, to gather them to the battle of that great day of God Almighty. And they gathered them together to the place called in Hebrew, Armageddon." Will today's events lead to a wider conflict as described in these verses? If they do, then the Middle East and its problems are of vital concern to all of us. Are we seeing the prelude to World War III? Is there a way we can know? Well, on today's program, I'm going to help you understand the present trends in the Middle East and how they will impact the world scene in the near future. You can then decide for yourself whether Bible prophecy is actually being fulfilled. Did you realize in nearly 6,000 years of man's recorded history, there have been less than 300 years when we have not been at war? Today we seem to think that we have peace if the nuclear superpowers are not at war with each other. But right now there are 25 wars going on, and all are in the third world countries. In this decade alone, about 4 million people have died so far, 80% of them civilians. In addition to these wars, the world is arming itself at an unprecedented rate, and nowhere is this more evident than the Middle East. Dr. Yahya Sadowski, research assistant at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C., explained how the continual conflict in the Middle East has spawned one of the most heavily armed regions in the world.
You also have to keep in mind that the kind of weaponry that's being used by local parties in the Middle East conflict is far more sophisticated, far larger in quantity and so on, than the disputants in any other regional conflict can have access to. The Syrian army alone, for example, today deploys more heavy military equipment, tanks, airplanes, missiles, and so on, than the armies of France or Great Britain. And increasingly sophisticated weapons are being introduced into the region. Gas warfare is already more or less routine in the Gulf conflict. The Syrians and the Israelis are both thinking about using it in the next round of conflict. The Israelis do have the bomb. That's a possibility that they might use it at some point in the future. And there are a whole series of increasingly sophisticated weapons that have kind of eroded the traditional distinctions between conventional and nuclear warfare, which are likely to be introduced in the region over the next 5 years.
So with the increase of military armaments being pumped into the region, feeding the flames of conflict, the Middle East now becomes one of the most dangerous areas in the world. Add to that the strategic interests of the superpowers, and you have a formula for a massive conflict.
But it is important to note that there's a crucial difference to the circumstances in the Middle East that sets it apart from similar conflicts in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, or even in Southeast Asia. At least two important differences, actually, that deserve our attention. One of them is the deepening role of the superpowers in the Middle East conflict in contrast to these other kinds of regions. We have seen repeatedly in the history of the modern Middle East occasions in which the Soviet Union and the United States appeared to be striding together toward a conflict in a rapid manner that's quite unthinkable in other parts of the world. During the 1973 war, when the United States staged a nuclear alert, during some other periods when we've contemplated introducing nuclear weapons into the region, the exchange of Soviet and American notes during the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon, all show the potential that a regional conflict in the Middle East would escalate into a multinational conflagration.
Robin Wright, senior associate at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, is an award-winning journalist with extensive experience in reporting the Middle East conflict.
So my great fear is that what is originally a regional conflict will have increasingly an overspill on international affairs. The danger, in addition, is that as conflicts become oriented around different issues, broader issues such as religion, the traditional powers that have mediated conflicts will no longer be accepted as credible in finding solutions.
We've reached a pivotal point in history where the superpowers of the world are finding it more and more difficult to negotiate peaceful solutions to regional quarrels. It's becoming more difficult for them to protect their own interests and preserve the balance of power. When we talk about the balance of power today, we mean the balance between the United States and the Soviet Union, superpowers since the Second World War. They are trying to build a better relationship. But that's today. What about tomorrow? What is going to develop on the geopolitical scene? Bible prophecy gives us the answers. In fact, it adds another important factor into the equation, a third superpower. Another player in the superpower stakes would add a crucial new dimension, not only in the Middle East, but around the world. At this time, the United States and the Soviet Union are still the undisputed superpowers. But geopoliticians are sensing that there may be a shift in balance of global power in the next decade. For example, the recent problems in the United States economy have made many keenly aware that its dominance as a world power may not be invincible after all. A political analyst in Foreign Affairs Journal wrote, Can the world's largest debtor nation remain the world's leading power? Can the United States continue to lead its alliance systems as it goes increasingly into debt to the countries that are supposed to be its followers? Meanwhile, the Soviet Union is struggling with its own economic and political problems. Mikhail Gorbachev has recognized that Soviet intervention in Afghanistan has been a costly mistake, and he's arranging a withdrawal. The world is changing. The influence of the superpowers can no longer be taken for granted. It appears that the superpowers who successfully mediated past conflicts no longer wield unquestioned influence. For the first time since the Second World War, there is room for another superpower to move onto the world stage. Who will it be? When will it happen? And how will it affect what happens in the Middle East? Probably no region on earth today is more misunderstood. It's a mystery, an enigma to many. Yet it's vital for us to understand what is going to happen as we near the last decade of the 20th century. To help you understand, we prepared this important new booklet, The Middle East in Prophecy. The Middle East in Prophecy will give you a fresh perspective on the troubled Mideast region. You've never read anything like it before. The Middle East in Prophecy not only explains how the Middle East got itself into the tragic state of affairs we see today, it also shows where today's events are leading as revealed in the pages of Bible prophecy. You need to read this informative and eye-opening booklet, The Middle East in Prophecy. It is illustrated, interesting, and comprehensive. And along with it, we'd like to also send you a free trial subscription to The Plain Truth, a magazine of understanding. It's yours free for as long as you'd like. The Plain Truth has been published for over 50 years now. This magazine explains the meaning behind the news in the light of Bible prophecy. I'll be offering The Plain Truth and The Middle East in Prophecy again at the end of today's program. As we take a deeper look into the Middle East, we'll find it's rapidly becoming the most critical and the most dangerous of the world's trouble spots. And if the situation gets out of control, it could ultimately involve the superpowers in what we all fear most, an all-out world war. Such a war, if fought with today's modern weaponry, would have disastrous consequences, not only for the Middle East, but the entire world. In the book of Daniel, chapter 11, there's a long and detailed prophecy which predicts in remarkable detail the general course of the events in the Middle East region from the 6th century BC to the present day and on into the future. Let's focus on just one aspect of it, the events that are predicted for the Middle East region, and especially for Jerusalem, at a time Daniel calls the time of the end. It's a time of unprecedented world crisis, and it's easy to identify that time as our time now. Daniel writes of a future superpower that will sweep into the Middle East and occupy the Holy Land. He calls this power the King of the North. This power, as Daniel explains in Daniel 11, verse 41, shall also enter the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown. Many students of the Bible have correctly identified this prophecy as referring to modern times, but they have made the mistake of assuming that this King of the North is the Soviet Union. When you put all the information together, it's quite clear that this cannot be true. And while the Bible does refer to the Soviet Union in other prophecies, the King of the North is a very different power. The prophecies show that before the great world crisis can occur, this King of the North explodes onto the scene, suddenly, dramatically, taking the world by surprise. In other words, a third superpower. Bible prophecy shows that the King of the North will be the successor to the mighty Roman Empire. Its various revivals, which have been called in history the Holy Roman Empire, have ruled Europe throughout the centuries. Could such a power appear again in Europe? To unite the states of Europe has been a goal of great statesmen for centuries. The 12 nations of the European Economic Community have set themselves the goal of a Europe without frontiers by the end of 1992. It's in the interest of all Europeans to preserve the unprecedented period of peace and prosperity that they've enjoyed since the war ended over 40 years ago. Russia's Eastern European satellites, at one time the eastern heartland of the Holy Roman Empire, are also being given more opportunity for independence by Mr. Gorbachev's government. Europe is changing. Its states are beginning to see that they cannot forever remain in the shadow of the superpowers. There's no question that a united Europe would be a power to reckon with. With a combined population greater than the United States or Russia, Europe could indeed become a third superpower. Europe has the potential to become an economic, industrial, and even a military power that would force the world to take notice. For some, Europe's destiny as a third superpower isn't mere conjecture, but a soon coming reality. It's just a matter of time. Like the once mighty Holy Roman Empire, which maintained peace throughout the ancient world, a united Europe would be such a force in the modern world. An outspoken advocate of Europe's potential as an influential world power is Belgian author Jean Thériault. He has written extensively on the future of European unity.
It's certain that a united Europe would be far more able to solve almost instantaneously the problem of peace in the Middle East, which is a very dangerous bomb. The will to enlarge Europe is also the will to re-establish peace and calm, as well as equity between antagonist groups. And I'm still thinking about the problem between Israel and Palestine. We could not, and Europe would not allow this continual mess in the Middle East, as the U.S. has not been able to stop it for 30 or 35 years. The greatness and the power of Europe should end up in a calm, just as in the Roman Empire. The purpose was to establish peace, quietness, and equity on the whole territory. It was the final will of the greatest Roman emperors, that is, to ensure peace within the empire. So Europe will also want to bring peace in so many places where the blood has been running for 30 or 35 years.
Could such a European power arise and impose its will on the warring states of the Middle East? The prophecies of the Bible show that this will happen. Certainly, the tactful diplomats and statesmen now trying to forge links among the states of the European Economic Community have no such plans in mind. But recent history has shown that the mood of Europe can change very quickly. The prophecies of the Bible tell us that the Middle East crisis will be resolved in a very unexpected way. Is it just a coincidence that the situation we see unfolding in the Middle East today has been foretold, recorded in the Bible thousands of years ago? These are things you need to look into for yourself. What is happening now in this troubled region, so many thousands of miles away from most of us watching this program, is going to affect us. We are on a collision course with some events that will change our world forever. As the ancient prophet Zechariah wrote in chapter 12, verse 3, "And it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all peoples. All who would heave it away will surely be cut in pieces, though all nations of the earth are gathered against it." Jerusalem has a deep meaning to three great religions: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Perhaps the most significant area in Jerusalem is the Temple Mount. To the Jews, it's the site of the Western Wall, the last of the remains of their holy temple. To the Muslims, it's the Dome of the Rock, which marks the spot where tradition says Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven to speak to God. Today, the Temple Mount is territory controlled by Israel, but the day-to-day supervision is in the hands of Muslim authorities. Many devout Jews refuse to go there. Other more extreme groups want to see a strong Jewish presence, even to the extent of reestablishing Jewish rights, something guaranteed to outrage the Islamic world.
The Temple Mount, of course, symbolizes the conflict as redefined by fundamentalists, both among Islam and Judaism, so that it, because of claims by both religions, could become the explosive focal point for a holy war. Of course, when it was captured in 1967, most Israelis believed that East Jerusalem would be part of a land for peace swap eventually with the Arabs. And so the Muslim authorities that have ruled it for 13 centuries were allowed to hang on to it. But as fundamentalism became a force in the 70s, the Temple Mount increasingly became a point of argument. And there are even today many secular politicians who are swayed by the fundamentalist arguments Why is it that this symbol, this place where the first and second temples were built, is still run today by Muslims? It must be ours again.
Well, it's obviously a symbol that both sides can play upon. The proximity of the Wailing Wall, the notion that this is the site of the original temple and therefore that Jews have some prior right to access to this territory, despite the fact that there is an existing Islamic shrine on the site, makes it easy for both sides to use the Temple Mount as a location in which to stage, in which to symbolize their conflict. And I've no doubt that in the future we will see both Islamists on the Arab side and Jewish fundamentalists on the other side provoking conflicts on the Mount as a way of bringing world attention to their causes.
Bible prophecy refers to this trouble spot. In Matthew 24, verse 15, we're told of a future time when events concerning the Temple Mount will be the warning that the world is about to enter its greatest time of trial. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet standing in the holy place, the Temple Mount, then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. And continuing in verse 21, for then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been since the beginning of the world unto this time, no, nor ever shall be. Over 2,000 years ago, the Bible warned us that this trouble in Jerusalem would become the focal point of an all-out struggle for world control. Just how that is going to happen is now coming into sharper focus. The prophet Isaiah foretold a time when Jerusalem would be transformed from the focal point of world trouble to the center of international peace. Isaiah 2 and verse 2. Now it shall come to pass in the latter days that the mountain of the Lord's house shall be established on the top of the mountains, and shall be exalted above the hills, and all nations shall flow to it. It's ironic that the three religions in the Middle East, the Jews, Christians, and Muslims, all expect the miraculous intervention of a deliverer, a Messiah, or Christ, or Mahdi, who will set things right, plead their cause, and establish a world of peace and justice. That's exactly what is going to happen. This Messiah, or Christ, or Mahdi that these faiths have been waiting for will come. He will establish lasting peace on earth. The God who created all peoples will intervene to prevent his creation from utter destruction. Man will have learned that on his own, he does not know the way to lasting peace. And before the external conflicts of violence and war can be resolved, the internal conflicts of the heart and mind must be overcome. Isaiah wrote in chapter 59, verse 8, the way of peace they have not known, and there is no justice in their ways. They have made themselves crooked paths. Whoever takes that way shall not know peace. Before this world knows peace, there has got to be a change of heart. But none of us can do this without God's help. And under his direction, all the nations of this world will come to their senses. They will come to acknowledge that they do not know how to solve their problems without God's help. Isaiah called the long-awaited Messiah the Prince of Peace. We read in Isaiah chapter 9, verse 6, and the government will be upon his shoulder, and his name will be called Wonderful, Counselor, the Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. He will establish one supreme government on earth. Only then will the prophecies of peace that seem so far-fetched today become a reality. Nations will finally begin to turn their potential for war into lasting peace. The world will learn another way of life. Isaiah chapter 2, verse 4. He shall judge between the nations, and shall rebuke many people. They shall beat their swords into plowshares, and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. So ironically, the Middle East, presently the center of such hatred, violence, and war, will ultimately become the birthplace of a new world that will finally know the way to true peace. That is the clear message of biblical prophecy. Now you need to know more. That's why we've prepared this brand new booklet, The Middle East in Prophecy. It will give you an understanding of what's happening in the Middle East that goes beyond today's news. The present and future of the Middle East cannot be understood apart from its past. Chapter 1, The Seed of Abraham, explains the ancient biblical roots of today's Mideast conflict, including the biblical identities of the Arabs and the Israelis. Chapter 2, The Banner of Islam, surveys the dramatic story of the rise and expansion of the Islamic faith, which continues to play a vital role in the region today. Chapter 3, Seeds of Strife. This recounts the turbulent events of the early decades of this 20th century that were instrumental in setting the stage for today's crisis. Chapter 4, What Lies Ahead. This eye-opening chapter shows from Bible prophecy where today's crisis is leading and how peace will ultimately come to the war-torn Middle East. You simply cannot afford to be without this information. The 48-page booklet, The Middle East in Prophecy, is one of the most thorough, comprehensive booklets we've ever offered, and it's absolutely free of charge. And if you're not already a subscriber to the Plain Truth magazine, we'd like to send you a free trial subscription for as long as you'd like. Printed in 7 languages, The Plain Truth is read by millions of people worldwide. The Plain Truth covers not only world news, but also shows you what world trends and events mean to you and your future in the light of Bible prophecy. It has articles on the family and other aspects of daily life, with solutions to many of the problems facing our societies. Now, we've nothing to sell on the World Tomorrow program. All of our literature is yours for the asking, free of charge, no cost, no obligation whatsoever. We're simply not going to ask you for money. So, for a free subscription to The Plain Truth and this free booklet, The Middle East in Prophecy, please telephone for the cost of a local call 008-074-222. That's 008-074-222. We have many operators waiting, but if you don't get through right away, call us again in 10 or 15 minutes. That's 008-074-222. Or if you prefer to write, then please address your letters to The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales, 2001. That's The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales, 2001. Next week on The World Tomorrow, David Hume will be presenting an important program about the Soviet Union. Since the end of World War II, the United States and the Soviet Union have been locked in a worldwide power struggle. But will this new era of détente and arms reduction lessen the danger of a third world war? Bible prophecy reveals the outcome of the superpower rivalry. Don't miss next week's program, Russia and Prophecy. Thanks for being with us today. I'm Richard Ames for The World Tomorrow.
For the free literature offered on this program, write to The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales, 2001. Or for the cost of a local call, please telephone 008-074-222. That's The World Tomorrow, GPO Box 345, Sydney, New South Wales, 2001. Or for the cost of a local call, please telephone 008-074-222. The preceding program and all literature were produced and sponsored by the Worldwide Church of God.